Good morning, everyone. Pastor Randy here with a morning word. It's November the 18th, 2020. We want to give a shout out and a toast, boom, to all of our teachers, our first responders, and our military personnel. God bless you. If it looks like I have a little bit of a shadow, you're right. I didn't shave this morning. It just is what it is. Don't condemn me before you listen to the morning word. Our morning word this morning is stoned. No, it's not a concert. What with the Grateful Dead concert? No, it's not a Grateful Dead concert. It's a morning word. Go to John chapter 8, verse 1. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, that is, after they had all separated in the evening time. Now early in the morning, he came again into the temple, and all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and the Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery in the very act. Now Moses, in the law, commanded us that such be stoned. But what do you say? This they said, testing him, that they might have something of which to accuse him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote on the ground with his finger as though he did not hear. So when they continued asking him, he raised himself up and said to them, He who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. Then those who heard it, being convicted by their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest even to the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. When he had raised himself up and saw no one but the woman, he said to her, Woman, where are those accusers of yours? Has no one condemned you? She said, No one, Lord. And Jesus said to her, Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Now, the morning word here is stoned. The law that they were talking about was the law of the commandments that God had given Moses to give to the children of Israel in the desert when he was forming a nation. So part of this, you have to have the understanding that God was forming a nation. They had to have some sort of law and order, and they're also establishing some morality. He's revealing his character. And he says that if anyone's caught in adultery, they should be stoned. Now, the particular detail about this is that very few people were ever stoned because the law required also that anyone that was caught in adultery had to be caught by two or more witnesses in the very act, and that when they brought the guilty before the priest, that their stories had to match exactly. So there was very few people that were actually stoned for this, and it was because that, again, they had to be caught in the very act. Now, of course, people that were in the act of that generally weren't publicizing that. Generally, weren't caught in the act of committing adultery. Nevertheless, there was another little minute detail that didn't happen here. The religious police, and that's what they were, the religious police, didn't bring the man. Now, you can't have adultery by yourself. All right, you can't commit adultery by yourself. So it takes two to tango. And so they brought the girl, but they didn't bring the man. Now, the law says that both parties had to be brought, and that both parties were guilty, if they were guilty, and that both parties should be stoned. So the question begs now is, why did the religious police, and that's the Pharisees and the scribes in the story, why did they not bring the man? Well, we don't know. But here's what we can speculate and be pretty close to it. He was probably a scribe or a Pharisee. It was a setup. It was a setup. It was either an ongoing affair that they knew of, that they were turning a blind eye to, or they had some guy that had been winking at some guy and thought that they were going to have the hookup, and they said, hey, tell us when you're going to do it because we want to come we ain't worried about you, we want to get the girl. Because the whole deal for this religious police thing was put Jesus in some sort of dilemma where they could either publicly embarrass him by making him side with the law, which would put him against the Romans. The Romans had outlawed the right that the Jews had previously exercised to execute people for violating the religious laws. They had outlawed that. The Jews couldn't put people to death on their own anymore. or he was going to side with the woman and be against the law of Moses and discredit himself in the crowd. So they did this publicly. They brought the woman out publicly. They addressed Jesus publicly. And Jesus now, mind you, now is in the temple, excuse me, and he's got a crowd around him. So this is a big, embarrassing public deal. And they're trying to put Jesus in a catch-22 situation to discredit him. And so they bring this woman caught in adultery. Now, what's the first thing that Jesus does? All right, so Jesus kneels down and he begins to write in the dirt. Now, there's all types of speculation. You've heard messages, sermons, probably studied of what was Jesus writing in the dirt. Are you ready? Now, I know exactly what he was writing in the dirt. Now, y'all need to write this down. We don't know what he was writing in the dirt. That's what I know. We don't know what he was writing in the dirt. And anything that anyone says is simply speculation. And it drives you away from the main point that he was trying to make. Doesn't matter what he's writing. Some people say he was writing the 10 Commandments. Who cares? Some people say he was writing down, thou shalt not commit adultery. Doesn't care. Actually, this whole thing takes place in about 3 to 5 minutes. Jesus didn't have time to write in the dirt the entire 10 Commandments. He didn't have time to write in the dirt all the people that were standing there. He didn't have time to write in the dirt all the sins they were committing. But if he did, and he didn't, but if he did, and he didn't, but if he did, they didn't have time for that. The time frame for this thing didn't allow it. He's just doodling in the dirt, all right? The main point of that, the reason, and if it had been important, let me put it this way, if it had been important, John would have written it down. So don't go beyond what is written. So he's doodling in the dirt. Here's what happens. He lets them make their case, and he stands up instead of saying, where's the man? Instead of saying, who caught her? Here's what Jesus said. Let's uphold the law completely. The law says that if a person is caught in the act of adultery, that the witnesses are to throw the first stone. The witnesses who saw it are to throw the first stone. They are to participate in the stoning. And they are the ones that are supposed to do it. Now, here's what Jesus did. He took the law higher. Remember, the spirit of the law exceeds the letter of the law. Here's what Jesus said in later teachings. Are you ready? He said, you've heard it said that if a man commits adultery, that thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say, Jesus said, I say that if you look at another with lust in your heart, you've already committed adultery. So it was the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law. And the spirit of the law is much higher. Now here's the deal. If we go with the spirit of the law, that the spirit of the law says that you should not even look at another person with lust in your heart. Guess who that disqualifies from throwing stones for adultery? Because we've all been there and done that. Got the shirt, got the hat. You may not have ever committed the act of adultery, but you have committed adultery in your heart when you look at other people with lust. And y'all know what I'm talking about. We don't have to expound on that. If you go to the beach every year, it's a planned trip to commit adultery. Bam, I said it. Now, here's the deal. Everyone's disqualified. So here's what Jesus, he stands up, he goes, okay, he doesn't discuss the law. They're standing on lawful ground. Here's what he says. The ones that are without sin, let's let those guys cast the stone first. Let the ones without sin cast the stones first. He didn't say, let the one without the sin of adultery, let the one without the sin of murder, let the one without the sin of hatred, worshiping other God. He just said, let the one without sin. Let me go back and read it. He who is without sin among you, let him throw a stone at her first. Stones. You see, guys, you're not qualified to have a stone in your hand to stone someone else with if you have sin in your life. Well, that got all of us. We'll see y'all next week. No, that's, what Jesus was trying to show these guys right here, what he's showing us is there's one person who condemns sinners. And he's the sinless one, Jesus. We're not, condemnation. Now, what are we talking about here with condemnation? We're not talking about, go to your room, time out. We're talking about death. The only one who can sentence people to death for their sin is Jesus. Now, let me say this. In the context of right and wrong and eternity, all right, Jesus is the arbiter of that. He set up human governments in the earth to exercise his laws, to include capital punishment. That's to maintain civil law and authority in the land. That's waning. And when that begins to go down, you begin to live in what we have going on right now in the world. But nevertheless, God set up human government to exercise that. But what we're talking about here is eternity, condemnation, and pardon, and death, life and death. Only Jesus has that right. That's why the Bible says, judge not lest you be judged. In other words, if I see you committing adultery, there's no question you've committed adultery. And there's no question there's a penalty in it. But I'm not the judge, see? There's only one judge here. Jesus is the judge. And only Jesus can condemn. Only Jesus. Now, here's the good news. All of these people were convicted by their sin. They were all convicted by their conscience. Their conscience got them. All right? And so their conscience made them drop their stones and walk away. Why? Because they all realized that instead of being the stoners, that is the stone in your hand, they should have been the stoned. There's our word. Instead of being the stoners, they realized they should have been the stoned. And so they find themselves in a catch-22, which always happens when you try to mess with Jesus and put him in a corner. You're going to find yourself in a corner. So they found themselves in a catch-22. So what did? They just dropped their stones, got real quiet, and walked off. And that's what we would be well to do. Be real quiet, drop your stones, and walk off. Because we all realize we're the ones that should be stoned. So here stands the judge, the sinless one, the only one who has the right to take a stone and to damn somebody to death. And he has a guilty person. No doubt she's guilty. Jesus knows it. Because here's what he says. He didn't say, now, did you do that? Did you really do that? Now that all these guys are gone, did you really do that? He knows she did it. And he tells her, he said, ma'am, where's all the people that were accusing you of adultery? She said, well, there's nobody here. Where are those accusers? Has no one of all these people around here condemned you? No. He said, I don't condemn you either. In other words, I have a stone and I could stone you. And the law says I should stone you. But I'm going to let you go free. Now, don't leave me here before you hear this. I'm going to let you go free. Go and sin no more. That tells you that Jesus knew that she was guilty. And that it tells you that he didn't just forgive her and then just let it go. He said, I'm going to forgive you, but when you go back home, don't do that again. Don't go back to your habit. Don't take forgiveness as a means as an opportunity to serve your flesh. I'm not condemning you, but go and sin no more. That's what the judge says. Now, how can he say that to her? By the same way he says it to me and to you and to all of us. Because in a few short days, Jesus is going to go to the cross. He's going to be the sinless Son of God. And there on that cross, he's going to take that woman's act of adultery. And he's going to take the sin of pride and arrogance and judgmentalism and so forth that all of the religious all the religious police had. Then he's going to take all the sins of Randy Fuller and all the sins of Mary Meadows and all the sins of Jeff Kelly and all the sins of Michelle Gravois and all the sins of Gail Dogan and all the sins of Jana Mason and so forth and so on. He's going to take the sins of the world. He's going to take our adulteries, our fornications, our bigotries, our idolatries, our covetousness, and so forth and so on. He's going to take them on himself. And you know what's going to happen? His Father is going to take the stone. The stone that should have killed me and the stone that should have killed you is the stone that God picked up and killed his Son. So Jesus can forgive that woman and Jesus can forgive me because he's already been stoned for it. That's good news. It don't get any better than that. So let's stop being the religious police in the sense of trying to find people to stone. And let's go and be to other people the way Jesus has been to us. He doesn't hide their sin. Matter of fact, he told the woman at the well, go get your husband. She said, I don't have a husband. He said, you're right. You've had 5 husbands and the guy you're shacking up with is number 6. So he didn't hide it. He just didn't beat them over the head with it to condemn them. So when we see obvious sins that need to be talked about or dealt with, let's don't do it publicly. Let's do it one-on-one. And let's tell people, hey, listen, I'm not bringing a stone to the conversation. I'm just telling you. Jesus has paid the price for our sin, but we need to go and sin no more. I mean, that's about the extent of it with us, all right? And the eternal damnation, condemnation, or forgiveness, and that's left up to the judge. We ain't the judge. We ain't even the jury. It's left up to the judge. So this morning, just thank God, just thank God that he didn't stone us for our sin. And so therefore, let's don't be hunting rocks. Let's don't be hunting stones. Let's don't see how bad we can beat people up. Let's see how far we can lift people up. Let's just say, hey, listen, go sin no more. There's a lot more to forgiveness than just this story. There's a lot more to dealing with sin than just this story. But what we're dealing with here, watch this now, what we're dealing with here is eternal matters. Eternal matters. And I want to bring one more word to bear here, just one more word, really. He said, woman, where are those accusers? Has no one condemned you? She said, no one, Lord. The word Lord there is kyrios, meaning master, the one who owns me. Let's leave all of the stoning up to the master, the one who owns us. We'll see y'all tomorrow, good Lord willing, and the saints don't rise. Peace out.